Everybody, it's Mr. Crone again with our weekly online lesson. I hope you all are well, staying safe, doing all your packets. I wanted to remind you that we have our Zoom meeting on Wednesday, so make sure you log on for that. Your teacher sent you the link to your parents. I also want to remind you at the end of the week to take the quick check to make sure that you are comprehending or learning what you're supposed to. And the last thing I want to remind you about is our upcoming graduation week. You should have gotten some information about that in the mail with a postcard. Make sure that you are participating in the spirit events and then drive by, I think, the 21st. Today's lesson we are talking about inherited traits. These are things that are passed down from parents to offspring through reproduction. We are actually pretty much experts at inherited traits, but it's always good to review so that we're ready for 6th grade. You are going to need a piece of paper, a pencil, and somebody or something to talk to. It might feel weird to talk to your dog or a toy, but remember, the best way to learn something is to teach it to somebody else. So when you can explain your thinking to somebody else, it sticks in your brain even more. It's really an interesting thing, but really cool. So if you're taking this seriously, you really should be explaining to somebody or something what you're thinking. You can pause the video while you get those things. Alright, welcome back. Our essential question for today is, how do animals' inherited traits help them survive? So how do the traits that animals inherit from their parents help them survive? Our objective is, I will be able to explain how inherited traits help animals survive in their environment and tell the difference between mimicry and camouflage. So there's 2 parts. You're going to be able to explain, that means talk about or write about how inherited traits help animals survive in their environment, and you're going to be able to recognize the difference between mimicry or camouflage. So I'm going to give you some animals. You're going to have to tell me if that's mimicry or camouflage. Starting us off with an open-ended question, what are some of the inherited traits of this child? Looking at this picture, what are some things that this child has inherited from its parents? What are some traits? I'll give you a second to make a list. Think about 3 or 4 things. So what I thought of is this child has inherited brown skin. So this child's skin is darker. It's got more pigment in it. That is something he must have inherited from his parents. It was not like his parents had orange skin or blue skin. He inherited the same skin color as his parents. I also noticed that he inherited dark eyes. So you can see they're not like blue or green. They are a darker brown color. You might have noticed other things like maybe his nose shape, his smile, those kind of things. So what are inherited traits? Inherited traits are the traits passed down from parents to offspring through reproduction. These traits are sometimes called physical traits because they have to do with the physical body, like skin color, height, hair color, eye color, etc. So having to do with your body. But inherited traits can also be behaviors that are passed down to offspring through reproduction. We call these instincts because these behaviors do not need to be learned. So inherited traits can be talking about the body or behaviors that animals are born with, they don't have to learn. This girl's got some inherited traits. You've got inherited traits. I've got inherited traits. Your dog has inherited traits, etc. We are going to read about some examples of animals who have inherited traits that help them survive. See if you can identify the inherited trait and how it helped the animals survive. So we're going to go to his website. You can click the link here. I have mine in my browser already. These are some examples of animals that have inherited traits to help them survive. So this is some koalas that are climbing a tree, a eucalyptus tree, sorry. So the baby koala is on the mom's back at the Lone Pine Koala Sanctuary near Brisbane, Queensland, Australia. Koalas have adapted to only eat the leaves of eucalyptus trees. Eucalyptus are very low in protein and toxic to many animals. Remember, toxic means poisonous. Being able to digest eucalyptus leaves is an adaptation that benefits the koalas by providing a food source for which there is little competition. So this mom has passed down the inherited trait of being able to eat eucalyptus leaves. This is important because eucalyptus are poisonous to most animals. But since the koalas can eat it, they've got an unlimited food source that nobody else can eat. It's a way of staying alive and reproducing so that they keep on having more and more koalas. Individuals of the same species are not all the same. Some animals are larger, hairier, or louder than others, even in the same species. That makes sense. We're not all the same. Some of us are taller, some of us are shorter, some of us are more outgoing, some of us are more shy. We're not all the same, even though we're the same species. These differences are largely determined by an individual's genes, which are like the instructions that are passed from parent to child. So your body has instructions in the genes that tell us how to develop or become what we are. Some differences provide advantages like speed, strength, or attractiveness. These advantages help animals survive and reproduce. Over generations, those traits or adaptations will be passed down to more individuals until the trait has become common in that species. An adaptation can be structural, meaning it is a physical part of the organism. It can also be behavioral, affecting the way the organism acts. An example of a structural adaptation is the way some plants have adapted to life in dry, hot deserts. Plants called succulents have adapted to the climate by storing water in their short, thick stems and leaves. So an inherited trait of succulents, like a plant, is leaves that can store water when it's dry and hot out. Migration is an example of a behavioral adaptation. Gray whales migrate thousands of kilometers each year. They swim from the cold Arctic Ocean to warm waters off the coast of Mexico. Gray whale calves are born in the warm southern waters and then travel north to groups to feed. So that is a behavioral adaptation. Nobody teaches them that, but they know to swim south to warmer water to have babies. That makes sense. When babies are born, they don't have as much blubber, and they probably couldn't survive in the super cold waters. So when they're born in warm waters, they give their bodies a chance to grow and develop blubber so that when they head to the cold waters again, they'll be able to survive. Adaptations that help with one challenge are sometimes used to help with other problems. Such traits are called exaptations. For example, feathers were probably first adaptations to manage temperature, but later feathers became longer and helped some species glide or even fly. Some adaptations, on the other hand, lose their function. Whales and dolphins have vestigial leg bones, the remains of the adaptation legs that their ancestors used to walk. So some adaptations are helpful for more than one thing, and some adaptations actually become not helpful at all and disappear through reproduction. So I want you to think about the adaptations that we saw, and I want you to look at this peppered moth. How does this peppered moth's adaptation of changing color help it survive? And where did that trait come from? So I want you to think. Here's a peppered moth, the same species, but with some different inherited traits. How does this inherited trait maybe help this second peppered moth survive better than the first one? And where did that trait come from? Pause the video and write down your answer. Alright, great. So my thought is the inherited trait that helped the peppered moth survive in its environment is lighter skin that looks like bark. So you can see that the second peppered moth, the skin is lighter and it looks very similar to the bark of the trees that the peppered moth lived on. This trait came from its parents. The second part. This moth has the traits that were passed down from its parents. So its parents must have had lighter, more camouflaged skin, and when they had babies, their babies had those same traits. Here are some important vocabulary words that you need to know. Adaptations. Adaptations are traits organisms inherit from their parents that are helpful to survive in an environment. So adaptations are kind of another word for inherited traits. They're traits that are helpful for an animal to survive in its environment. This giraffe has an adaptation, a structural adaptation. You might have guessed that its adaptation is its long neck. That's correct. Giraffes have adapted to live on grasslands where often there's not a lot of rain and not a lot of grass that's growing. So they have long necks so they can get food from the trees that are higher off the ground where most animals can't get to. Like deer can't get there, antelope. So they have found a way to get food without any other competition from anybody else. We already talked about koalas. Remember, they have special stomachs that can eat eucalyptus trees that nobody else can, so that they can get all this food with nobody else fighting them for it. Remember, that trait was passed down from the moms to the babies. It's an adaptation. What adaptations do you think this polar bear has? Yeah, that's right. It's got white fur that helps it blend in with the snowy habitat, camouflage. It's also got very thick layers of fat on its body. We call it blubber, that helps it stay warm in the very cold Arctic temperatures. Here's an example that you might remember from our class. We talked about these pocket mice that have adapted to change color because of the volcanic activity in the desert. Remember, they started off this yellow color, but after the volcano erupted and the lava dried into the dark brown color, the mice actually started changing colors with their environment to camouflage. Adapted. Another important word you need to know is camouflage. Camouflage means having the appearance of one's surroundings. When something is camouflaged, it means its body looks like its surroundings. You can see here this squirrel has brown fur just like the color of the trees that it lives in. This makes it more difficult for predators to spot it. Down here it's even more tricky. This zebra is camouflaged with its environment. The stripes on its back help it to blend in with the trees and leaves and the ground, making it really hard for predators to find them. So camouflage just means looking like one's surroundings. Mimicry is when an animal adapts to have the same appearance as a stronger species. So they're not looking like their environment, they're looking like a stronger species. Here you can see a moth that has adapted to look like something else. What animal does this moth look like? Exactly, it looks like an owl. It's got the round owl eyes. This will help it look more intimidating to predators. An animal that might be thinking about eating this moth will think twice because they might be tricked into thinking it's an owl. Here is an example of mimicry as well. So this is a coral snake and a king snake. King snakes are actually venomous or poisonous. They have fangs that if you get bitten by or an animal gets bitten by, the poison could paralyze or even kill that animal. This coral snake is not venomous at all. It couldn't hurt anybody. It could hurt mice, I guess, but not humans. However, this coral snake has adapted to have very similar pattern or color patterns to this king snake. That means that if a bird is flying by, they might confuse the coral snake for the actual poisonous king snake, the stronger one. This coral snake is mimicking the king snake. Here, you can see this caterpillar that is mimicking a snake, a stronger species. This caterpillar probably couldn't hurt anything, but a bird flying by or a lizard of some sort might be more intimidated because this caterpillar looks like a snake. So mimicry means looking like a stronger species. Camouflage, remember, means looking like the environment. So the big difference between mimicry and camouflage: mimicry looks like another species, a stronger species, and camouflage looks like the environment around them. Another important thing you need to know is the word structural adaptations. So these are adaptations of the body, structure of an organism that helps it survive. So we already talked about the giraffe with the long neck. This down here is an anteater. What do you think an anteater eats? The ants, right? So it's got this long, pointy nose that is an adaptation that helps it get deep into the ground where ants live, and it actually is like a vacuum and kind of snorts up all the ants in an anthill. So this long nose is a structural adaptation to help it get food more efficiently. This right here is a crocodile. This crocodile has eyes at the top of its head. This helps it see while its body's underwater. So it's almost like a camouflage because a bird might not notice just the teeny tiny eyes above the water. They might float by. This alligator can open its big jaws and smack, get its food. These are all structural adaptations or adaptations of the body that helps the animal survive. Remember, these are all inherited traits, traits that are passed down from parents to babies. So the mother and father alligator had eyes on the top of their head. The mother and father giraffe had long necks. The mother and father anteater had long noses. These are traits that are passed down from parents to offspring, inherited traits. All right, so I need you to get out your piece of paper and your pencil if you haven't yet, and write down the answers to these questions. A zebra's stripes helps it blend into an environment is an example of A, mimicry, B, camouflage, or C, structural adaptation. Think about it. Blending into its environment. Which of those, mimicry, camouflage, or structural adaptations, talk about blending into the environment? Number 2. When a moth inherits traits that make it look more like an owl, that is an example of camouflage, mimicry, or structural adaptation. When a moth looks like a stronger owl, that's an example of camouflage, mimicry, or structural adaptation. Write down your answer. Number 3, what structural adaptation does a giraffe have that helps it get leaves off of tall trees? Long tail, long neck, spots on its body. Which of those inherited traits helps the giraffe get leaves off of tall trees? And number 4, what inherited structural adaptation might help this woodpecker survive? Here's a woodpecker. It's a bird. The red on top of its head, the long pointy beak, or the wings to help it fly. Which of those is a structural adaptation that helps this woodpecker survive, do you think? Write down your answer. And the last part of our lesson, the expand. I need you to draw a picture of an inherited trait you would like to have to help you survive in your environment. So you should be drawing a picture of something that could help you survive in your environment. I want you to be creative. I was thinking that I would really like to have longer arms. I think it'd be fun to be able to grab things farther away. Like I could be sitting in my room and stick on my arm and go all the way to the kitchen, open the door, get some food. I think that would help me survive in my environment. So I want you to think of some inherited traits that you would like to get to help you survive in your environment. Maybe you want camouflage so you can sneak around the house. Maybe you want to have really strong skin so that nothing can hurt you. Be creative. All right, so to recap what we've talked about today, organisms inherit traits from their parents. These traits can help animals or organisms survive in their environments. They are camouflage, that means looking like the environment. Mimicry, which means looking like another stronger species. Or structural adaptations, that means like adaptations to the body, like long necks or long noses that help animals survive. All right, for your exit ticket, you're going to answer this open-ended question. In your own words, explain the difference between mimicry and camouflage. So in a complete sentence, I need you to compare and contrast mimicry and camouflage. If you need to go back to watch that part of the video, you're welcome to do that. All right, next question. An alligator having eyes on the top of its head so it can see while its body is underwater is an example of A, structural adaptation, B, camouflage, or C, mimicry. Again, an alligator having eyes on the top of its head so it can see while its body is underwater is an example of a structural adaptation, camouflage, or mimicry. Pick your answer, write it on the line. Number 2, mice with the same color fur as the dark rocks of the desert is an example of A, mimicry, B, camouflage, or C, structural adaptation. Mice with the same color fur as the dark rocks of the desert is an example of mimicry, camouflage, or structural adaptation. Pick your answer, write it on the line. Last question, a cheetah having a long tail to help it balance while it runs is an example of A, camouflage, B, structural adaptation, or C, mimicry. So a cheetah having a long tail to help it balance while it runs is an example of camouflage, a structural adaptation, or mimicry. Once again, write your letter on the line. When you're finished, please put this paper with your name on it in the envelope that was sent out with your packets so that I can check your work and give you your participation points. If you need to go over any part of the lesson, please feel free to go back to the start of the video or whatever section was tricky for you. I really miss you guys. I can't wait to see you during graduation. I hope all is well. Take care. Bye.